Syria. This was serious business. People were always surprised to hear I went to visit Syria, but you can't be a true world traveler to have visited all the countries if you don't visit Syria. Don't be that tourist who steps one foot across the border and claims he's been to the country. I didn't mean to leave Syria as the last country to visit, but I wanted to visit all countries without taking a tour. I preferred staying with locals to gain the authentic local experience. I thus avoided hotels, but when taking a tour, it was luxury tourism for me. It just so happened that I had to take tours in 4 countries: the DPRK for 11 days, Bhutan for 4 days, Turkmenistan for 2 days, and now Syria for 3 days. As with all countries, if you keep the rules, your trip will go smooth. I decided to finally give in to following the rules and taking a tour to Damascus, Syria. It seemed most travelers to Syria these days wanted to visit the war-torn parts of the city or country. They wanted to make their trip sound extreme and exciting, even venturing off the beaten path to forbidden parts of the country. But my goal for Syria was simply to visit the country, see the capital city, meet the people, and do local activities like visiting the zoo, going to cafes, and strolling through the streets. Because of those tourists trying to visit war-torn parts of the city and portraying Syria in a bad light, aka Felix, the government decided all tourists needed to be with a tour guide. Syria was once a large tourist destination, and they wanted it to return back to how it used to be. They didn't want these new tourists misrepresenting their country by portraying the country still in war and thus keeping tourist numbers down. Thus, the new rule for guide was now required. After realizing independent tourism wasn't allowed because of the problems previous tourists had caused, I agreed to hire a local guide and follow the rules of the country. After all, they just wanted to return back to normal life and bring tourists back into their country. Tourism was a big economy around the world, and Syria wanted back their share of the pie. Thus, I commenced my trip to Damascus, Syria, to visit the city for 3 days. Day 1. All tours started by flying into Beirut and taking a 4-hour taxi across the border to Damascus. I started in Istanbul by meeting my friend Nina and her mom, who happened to be flying to Beirut and taking that taxi across the border. I asked to join them, and they agreed. There was the option of flying into and out of Damascus, but I wanted to see the landscape and experience the distance Damascus was from Beirut. Thus, we flew into Beirut and jumped into a pre-arranged taxi that would take us across the border. Formalities took about an hour, and I picked up my visa at the border office, which was prepared for in advance. After crossing over the mountain pass, I descended upon Damascus, a sprawling metropolis, more populated than Beirut. On my first day, my taxi driver dropped me off at my hotel, where I would check in and meet my guide, Ahmed. I wanted to get my hair cut and visit a hammam. I learned the barber had been cutting hair for 35 years and learned the trade from his father. The hammam across the pedestrian path was 800 years old. They sure knew how to serve the customers by providing them tea and shisha after their bath. The inside architecture was amazing, and it had been renovated 10 years prior. The next day was the big day, because I would have all day with my guide to explore Damascus, and he would show me the most important places to visit. Plus, I would suggest him a few places that I wanted to visit. My guide gave me an introduction to Damascus by taking me on a walk in the evening to view everyday city life. We went to find the falafel joint that was popular with the locals. We strolled to a city park to sit down and eat. I returned to my hotel, and we would meet the next day. Day 2. This was the big day. I had only gotten a few hours of sleep, but I was excited to explore the capital of Syria with my guide. He decided to bring along his friend, Allah, a local Syrian guide who studied Japanese and provided tours to Japanese tourists. Our first stop was to walk to Old Damascus and visit this old historical street called Straight Street. It was visited by St. Paul the Apostle in the book of Acts. If you read Acts chapter 9 verse 11, it reads, "And the Lord said unto him, Ananias, arise, and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. For behold, he prayeth." This was the exact same street that was mentioned in the Bible. We also visited the house of Ananias, an ancient underground structure. It was a site where Ananias baptized Saul. Along the way, we stopped to visit a bakery where they made pocket bread, also known as pita bread. Backgammon was a popular game, and several shops handcrafted the wooden board game. Backgammon was one of the oldest known board games, traced to nearly 5,000 years ago. In comparison, chess was only 1,400 years old. No tour of Damascus was complete without visiting the Al-Hamadiyya souk. Shops were just opening, and it wasn't crowded as usual. It was also Sunday, so people were sleeping in. I stopped by the famous ice cream shop called Bakdesh. This shop was established in 1885 and had become a popular tourist destination. Umayyad Mosque was open for visitors. However, non-Muslims were required to pay a modest price equivalent to the price of ice cream at Bagdash Ice Cream Shop. It was one of the oldest mosques in the world. After walking through Al-Hamadiyya souk, I wanted to visit the zoo. It was off the tourist itinerary, and my guide told me he hadn't been there for at least 5 years, whereas our friend Allah had never visited this zoo. There had been 2 zoos in Damascus, and the larger zoo had been destroyed, but the smaller zoo was still functional and in operation. Inside the zoo, it was well maintained and clean. There were dogs, cats, and pigeons as expected, plus the camels, monkeys, bears, and hyenas. I was surprised to find so many lions, but I later learned, after doing research for this video, that the Arabic word for lion was the same name as the president's surname. Thus, it made sense to have a lot of lions at the zoo, in honor of the president. The thing I liked about foreign zoos was that they were fair to all animals. They didn't discriminate against any animal. That's why dogs, cats, pigeons, and even chickens held a spot in foreign zoos. Altogether, I enjoyed the zoo experience. There was even a playground for children to enjoy. We returned once again to the old city to see it during the livelihood of the day. Shops were open now, and I found plenty of souvenirs available for purchase. The main tourists in the city were Syrians from other cities. Street snacks were readily accessible, like corn on the cob, pizza, and falafels. We passed by a juice stand selling pomegranate and orange juice. We went to pick up some food at a fast food outlet and eat back at the tourism office. My guide told me he had nightlife scheduled for the evening, but as I was on a tour, I would rather bypass bar hopping and discover something new, like the Sushi by Sake restaurant. Wow, who knew there was a movie theater and sushi restaurant in Damascus? This place was ultra modern and fancy. On top of that, I discovered that there were 6 Filipinos working there. I literally found Filipinos everywhere in the world, and doing what they were best at, working. I happened to run into a Filipino finishing work, and I had a brief chat with him before stepping into and sitting down at the restaurant to try their avocado sushi. The place had a good atmosphere, and I enjoyed the evening there. After dinner, I returned back to my hotel for the evening to rest and organize my last morning in Syria. Along the way, I stopped by to have tea at Havana Cafe, an old cafe established in 1945 and preserved throughout the years. Day 3. The last days were always rushed and short. I had a couple hours in the morning before catching my bus. I met with a local couchsurfer for breakfast and then met with a second member. We strolled through the streets, stopping at Havana Cafe briefly. I learned this cafe was known as the birthplace of novels, poems, and even coups, because it was the meeting point for many elite members of society. I said goodbye to the girl and later the guy, but after enjoying a fresh cup of pomegranate juice, I joined my guide and hopped into his friend's car to drive to the bus station. We said goodbye, and I would make my 6-hour journey southbound to Amman, Jordan, where I would catch my flight back home. I realized Syria wasn't as dangerous as advertised in the media, and like I learned in Libya, all countries were safe as long as you avoided areas of conflict within the country. And thus, Syria completed my quest to visit all countries in the world, and next I plan to celebrate in New Zealand. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more adventures!